there was a definite trend amongst the gay couples and lesbian couples to imitate the heterosexual nuclear family by adopting children and creating what they call the family. This pro-family trend is causing a very interesting split among gay couples who would agree with the trend and who would not agree with the trend. We are here calling the two parties the assimilation approach versus resistance approach. Assimilation approach people who say yes to this family trend are after the equality for gays and lesbians through granting the same civil rights as heterosexual people, such as legal right to marry, legal right to adopt a child. So this is what we may call the liberals, who would support the equal right, equal civil right amongst the sexual minorities. On the other hand, there are people who would resist against this trend of the pro-family trend in gay communities. This is a very interesting bunch of people who argue that gay politics should remain definitely critical of all kinds of oppressions stemming from the norms of heterosexuality, which they include marriage. In other words, the resistance camp people argue that pursuing marriage and pursuing the similar lifestyle as heterosexual people would be selling out of the gay communities. Some of the reasons why the resistance camp people are so against the idea of gay marriage and advancing marriage among gay communities is because they believe that by pursuing marriage, same-sex couples are going to just replicate the inequality that is happening in heterosexual marriage. Let's take a look at the gender division of labor, or in other words, who does domestic work in the same-sex couples. Many of us might believe that just because there are two men or two women living in the same household, they tend to split the domestic work or house chores more equally than a heterosexual couple. However, this is so far from the truth. Only 25% of the wealthiest gay couples and lesbian couples achieve the 50-50 split or equal division of domestic work. And the reason why they are so fortunate to be able to split domestic work 50-50 is simply because they have so much money. They tend to cater out most of the domestic work, such as hiring cleaning service, maid service, or eating out and dining out instead of cooking dinner at home. This means that majority or 75% of lesbian gay couples actually have one person specializing in domestic work. And in fact, this one person who does most of the domestic work is as unhappy as a woman in a heterosexual marriage who is doing most of the domestic work. This one person tends to complain that the other person does not contribute. The other person doesn't really care about the house, how the house is kept. It seems like in most of the lesbian gay couples, despite that this is only one single gender of two people living in one household, they still tend to replicate the unequal division of domestic labor. Furthermore, if we look at what kind of people tend to take on more domestic work in lesbian gay relationship, the one who tends to have lower income, the one who has a temporary job, or the one who has more fixed hours at work, those people tend to take on more of the house chore. Being low income, being in a temporary employment situation, and having a definite off time, such as having a job from 9 to 5 without having to travel too much for business purposes. These are the people who have the traditionally feminine occupations, such as teachers, being an office clerk, or secretaries. Interestingly, even in gay marriages, the one with the more feminine economic status tends to play the wife role, who has to take on the more burden of the domestic work, which tends to be unappreciated and unvalued by the other person. Secondly, The resistance camp people argue that the whole idea of giving gay lesbian couples the equal rights to heterosexual couples, this very argument can be oppressive. There are lots of psychologists and also social psychologists who argue that gay couples can become as good parents as heterosexual parents. Those people are very busy arguing that there is no empirical significant differences between heterosexual and homosexual couples. However, this very logic or the very way of arguing that there is no difference can be actually in a very subtle way oppressive. This is holding the heterosexual parenting as if this is the gold standard for the same-sex marriage people to meet. This implicitly puts heterosexuality on pedestal. And this way of thinking, even though this might look quite benevolent, hinders our chance to inspect the uniqueness or the advantage that same-sex couple may have over heterosexual couples. For example, when lesbian couples raise their daughters, they are shown to be freer from raising their children according to gender stereotypes and gender pigeonholing, perhaps because they themselves have suffered from gender bias and gender oppression in their lifetime. Therefore, they are more conscious to raise their young daughters to be resistant and challenging the gender norms. All in all, this whole discourse, even though they might sound quite progressive, give lesbian gay couples the same rights. We really have to examine this statement more carefully in order not to perpetuate that centricity of heterosexuality and heterosexuality dominance in our society.